Sure, the truth, if we look at the picture of our Europe, Europe seems to hit the bottom. What do we hear? We hear about closing borders again and suspending the Schengen Agreement. We hear about countries strangled by their debts. Portugal is hard hit, and I know how difficult the situation is politically, financially, economically, even if the international help of 78 billion euros from the EU and the IMF gives more long-term perspectives today. We hear, most of all, about populist temptations all over Europe. In Finland, in Hungary, with new laws restricting the freedom of the media and the rights of minorities, but also in Italy, the Netherlands, not to forget France. The second factor is the whole world seems to think today Europe is more a problem than a solution. The crisis of the euro is still today a threat for worldwide recovery. The answer of the continent, wide austerity, has two edges. On the one side, it's a source of confidence for the market. They seem to be reassured by the efforts made by the Europeans. But on another hand, strong austerity cures are cutting tomorrow's growth. Economists have measured the consequences of such a cure of austerity. They mentioned half a GDP point of growth less next year because of budget cuts. And we do know that this have consequences on the daily life of the European. Less capacity to buy goods, less capacity to look forward to the future. The second element is the lack of message of Europe. And this is a very cruel element for all the ones who believe in the capacity and in the role of Europe. This message of Europe, we don't hear it in the international scene. Look what we are doing in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We are the country, Europe, we are the continent that is giving the more money for Palestine, but we don't have any voice. Look what the situation is today in the Arab world, in Maghreb, in Egypt. Do we hear a strong voice of Europe? No. The European diplomacy waited for 2 days before it issued a written comment on the departure of President Ben Ali. That's not at the level of what should be our Europe. The weakness of Europe has been one cause of the failure of the global climate change summits of Copenhagen and Cancun, because Europe came divided and speechless, where so much depended on her. But nevertheless, there are some signs of changes in favor of Europe. And I would like to mention 3 signs. First, the Arab awakening, because it's also an awakening for us, something that should remember us that our values are still alive. These countries in the other side of the Mediterranean, they are our neighbors. We share a long history. It's a chance for us and it's a duty. I think a country like Portugal, with old and deep ties towards Northern Africa, understands it better than many countries. The second reason is the world's new economic order that pledges for solidarity. In the collision of huge markets with each other, we don't have any other choice than to face the challenge with our European partners. Portugal does not have a chance alone. France does not stand a chance alone, but neither does Germany. It's no time for lone riders. The third sign I would like to mention is the debt crisis. In the end, this situation will force Europe to invent new solutions. It has already with the European Financial Stabilization Fund. At one time or another, the Europeans will have to wait the possibility of Eurobonds to give more perspective, more capacity to our Europe to act, to answer the concrete challenges of recovery, because we can't oversee the difficulties of many of our partners. We need more imagination and we need new tools. There is a good reason of such a comeback of Europe. Europe has always been a place for reconciliation between local and global. Europe's politics have built upon two very old principles. The first one is the personal commitment of the citizens. We can count on our citizens. This personal commitment was invented by the French Revolution. That's the political solution to maintain coherent actions at all levels. The second principle is subsidiarity. Always let the power that's nearest to the problem take charge. You don't call the president when there is a traffic jam. You don't ask the mayor of your village to engage your country into a war. Everyone should do its own task at its own level. That's where the world needs Europe to get back into the game. This world of fears cannot afford neither an isolated Europe, neither an isolationist Europe. Europe can be a cornerstone of governance. It still has the economic and political strengths to do it. Europe can also be an example of balanced management of local and global levels through permanent dialogue and through cooperative action. Let me rephrase my belief. It's time for Europe to awake. This means getting back on track. That means taking things in our own hands. I have today, this morning, three main messages. Because you are among the leaders, the decision makers, the people with the influence in Europe. You have a huge job to do in the coming months and in the coming years. My first message, coming from experience, is we have to be more pragmatic. And we have to find the right solutions. We should not wait to be ready to turn outwards. You may call it foolish and dangerous, but let's have a closer look at our history. In fact, it is the way Europe always has made progress. That's something people here, your country, Portugal, will understand better than anyone else. They know what it is to overcome divisions and threats through a great endeavor. Think of Henry the Navigator staring in the sea from Cape Segur. Think of all the Magellans, Vasco da Gama, Bartholomew Diaz. Was this a reasonable thing to do? Of course not. But it made out Europe's identity for several generations. That's the way also Europe invented democracy. It was not a reasonable decision. It was the pursuit of a dream in times of economic difficulties. The French Revolution bursted out before having reflected on all the ifs and whys. Was this a reasonable thing to do then? Surely not. But that's how the whole Europe has undergone deep changes, difficult as they may have been. That also is how the European Union was born. At the end of a total war, nations shattered to the earth found the strength for reconciliation. They invented a new institutional model for integration, and soon, who could imagine that a few years before, Europe became a model again.